What did the MCP let you do that you couldn't do otherwise?
I created this backbone, which is like the MCP server that is running. And now depending on what I ask is using different tools, right? I could learn each and every API and make a specific API call for each product. But here the interesting is like if tomorrow I have a new idea, a new tool, I just call the same MCP server and it's going to use the right tool to answer my new idea.
The MCP is serving as this abstraction layer. It's a tool server. As new tools get added, I don't need, as a data dev, to learn the intricacies of the new API. I just still going to the same abstraction point and interacting with it. You found that it's really great in all of these ways. What were some of the limitations that you encountered, and how do we juxtapose those?
The MCP will only be as good as the best API available, right? So if your API cannot do something, your MCP also will not be able to do it.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.
Sensemakers.
So today we've got Tristan Guillevin from La Data Viz with us. And in case you don't know, Tristan just won multiple awards at the Tableau Conference for his demo of what was possible using the Tableau MCP. So this was in the Tableau Hackathon. And we wanted to have Tristan on today to talk about how MCP was enabling technology for him and doing the amazing things that were part of this demo. We'll have a link to the 5-minute video showing all these different things that are possible with Tableau today, and then talk about where we can go in the future.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I think it's mostly like I saw your video last time of the Tableau MCP when you were discussing things, and I'm like, yeah, I need to kind of chime in and be like, hey, I think there is also good things about the MCP, and yeah, I think the fact that that project won the hackathon, I was like, it's also a good reason to kind of have this discussion together, show what's possible, and also to your audience to show them what's possible.
Completely. What you're picking up on is we had made a little comment about how MCP is not so great. And that's the thing you picked up on. And so just to be clear, we're going to come back to that. So in this conversation, we're going to look at what makes MCP such a game changer. Next time, we're going to come back and dig into why it's maybe a little bit too rigid and not necessarily as flexible as it could be. And then in a third conversation, we'll try to make some sense over when to use which tool and which AI architecture is most successful under which circumstance.
So I think my first question to you, Tristan, is kind of what did the MCP let you do that you couldn't do otherwise?
Yeah, so I think is that I discovered afterward, right? So really the initial idea was like we do those online tools on our website, we do Viz extension that we have been doing since 2024. And the hackathon was for me like a reason, like a way to do something that I'm not usually doing, right? So it's like a reason to, okay, let's drop everything and try to build something for the hackathon. And there are actually two things that I have not used a lot in my data dev journey, I would say. One is old, is the dashboard extension, because I always thought they were like not good enough or like was nothing really interesting to build with dashboard extension. So kind of an old technology, and a new one, which was the MCP, Tableau MCP. So like, is there a way to combine both to do something that doesn't exist yet today? And to answer your question, I can share my screen. The first thing that you build when you have an MCP is like some kind of chatbot, right? And I think, funnily, this is kind of the first thing that I built, but also the one that is the most difficult to replicate, because this is really using all of what the MCP is good at, is picking the tool. So depending on what I'm asking, so for example, what are my data source? So right now, the Claude, who gets that message from me, is communicating with the Tableau MCP to see what tools does the MCP has to answer that question? And I have here the list of my data source. So I see, okay, sample superstore, blah, blah, blah. I can say how many, sorry, let's go here. How many users do I have on my server? And then again, it's going to use different tool to answer that question, right? So before we only use list data source, and now probably is going to again list the data source, but query the data source, and I guess he's going to query TS user, etc. Right? So currently we have 5 users, but I can ask something completely different, like do I have any pulse metric? And now we are going to use a new tool, which is the query the pulse metric, right? And I will do a final one to actually query the data. So we see that we have something called sales. So I'll be like, how much sales did I generate this month? Let's see if he can answer that. And now he's going to, again, query the data source based on what I found, right? So I think all of that is something that you could do those things individually through different tools using different API. But I think the interesting part here is I created this backbone, which is like the MCP server that is running. And now depending on what I ask is using different tools, right? And there is one that I have not coded in this chatbot, but is actually the one that I'm using the most in all of my project is query an image. So I can ask to get an image of a dashboard. So I didn't have this in the chat because I'm like, well, you can just check the dashboard if it exists, so don't need to return the image, right? But it can also query the image. So actually the project started with that, and then at the end it's called visual, and the main idea is to make accessibility tools for people in using the MCP. And the really interesting part, I think, is like all of the 6 tools, some are like outside Tableau, some are like dashboard extension inside Tableau. They are all using the same Tableau MCP server that then answer all the questions for everything, right? So depending on what the tool is using, we are every time using the same MCP server. So I didn't have to code each and every API that Tableau has to do what it needs to do. I just implemented one MCP server, and then I let that MCP choose the right API to do the job. So I think that is really how, for me, it was a bit game changing, is instead of, I could learn each and every API and make a specific API call for each product. But here, the interesting is like if tomorrow I have a new idea, a new tool, I just call the same MCP server and it's going to use the right tool to answer my new idea, right? So
the MCP was acting as an abstraction layer for this set of APIs. Yep.
And I could even be as if someone is a beginner in the world of data dev in Tableau, there is a lot of API and you don't necessarily know which one to use and what to do. So with the MCP, you can also be like, you know what, I rely on the MCP to know what to use, which I completely agree in one of the comments of your video that it is not the most efficient, as in at the end of the day, a lot of those tools could have been converted to just an API call that will be much less costly in like almost no tokens. But the advantage was really the speed, in the sense of like once I have my MCP server running, I can just build on top of it, and I don't need to know the API.
So you're able to do more of what stay in your skill set and do what you needed to do, and not have to do so much on the Tableau side.
Now, Tristan, what you said was very true. If you were to ask even one of the best models out there, a very good coding model, to build this from scratch and just rely on its training of the Tableau APIs, it's been getting much better over the years, but it would make mistakes, is the assumption, right? Like it would be a much slower of a process. Now, what the MCP is doing is taking the APIs that the Tableau APIs developers thought were most valuable to an agent, and packaging it for the agent to use as tools. Because it's
exactly
under the hood, it's really a tool server.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the example like of actual dashboard extension that I built that use that. And like I say, most of them use the image, but it's like, that's interesting, right? It's a combination of the image, but if the MCP consider that it's also good to query the underlying data, it's also going to do it, right? So for example, this one is really a simple extension that use the MCP to get the image and allows you to see how your dashboard looks for people who don't have any color blindness condition or people who have color blindness condition, right? So you can be like, okay, I see that clearly my usage of color here are not the best. You can also ask for color palette recommendation. And then again, based on this time on the type of charts that you have, is going to be like, hey, for a map, clearly this one, maybe using red green is not good. You should use blue and orange, right? Blue and orange here. If I ask for spell check in Tableau, now it can also do it. It looks at the image and say, okay, actually you made a mistake in the title of your dashboard. It's called Superstore instead of Superstore, right? And you can also, for example, so it's really a like in that case, it's really just checking the image, right? So nothing more than just getting the image that you could do with an API call.
So Tristan, what I'm picking up is that one of the main benefits is that the MCP is serving as this abstraction layer. It's a tool server. As new tools get added, I don't need as a data dev to learn the intricacies of the new API. I just still going to the same abstraction point and interacting with it. The cost of that thing is that I'm spending more tokens, whereas if I had kind of integrated my ability to work with those APIs, I could just do the same thing from the API for free. What are the limitations of the MCP? Because one of the things that I'm understanding from speaking with Stefan, and I think we're going to dive into this in the future, is that by definition, the MCP is static. The definitions of the tools in the MCP are, they do what they do and that's what they do, and it's rigid code, whereas an agentic programming approach is actually like giving the agency to the agent to make its own decisions and query the APIs directly. So I guess I'm just wondering, how did you navigate, because I understand that you got into this experiment with the MCPs to see what it is that you were working with because you hadn't worked with them before. You found that it's really great in all of these ways. What were some of the limitations that you encountered, and how do we juxtapose those?
The interesting part for me is that at the end of the day, from what I did, right, the limitation that I had were the limitation of the API itself that MCP is using, right? So if an API cannot do something, then the MCP, as good as it is, it also cannot do it. So
right.
So a really good example that with the combination of the dashboard extension and MCP, I run into two main issues, and I can show you that with maybe another a tool, Visual Learn. So this one is another accessibility tool that I built for people to learn how to read a dashboard, right? How to know what's in it. So for example, this is the last 12 V's of the day. So if I click, let's click on this one, the V's of the day is going to load. And on the right, I'm going to have the AI explaining me what's in that dashboard, right? So it's going to be, okay, this is executive summary, that this is the big picture. And if I want to explore specific charts and ask a question about a chart, I can, right? So this worked well, and I was really happy with that. Now, then at some point, one of the V's of the day was a V's with V's extension that are now able to run on Tableau Public. And that really nice tool was just telling me, hey, you are showing me an empty dashboard. There is nothing to analyze in it, because we are still stuck at the fact that the V's extension or any extension or any web content cannot be exported as image, right? So at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, the MCP's limitation were still the API limitation that we want Tableau to fix for a really long time, which is exporting image. And another one that I had to was also, for example, I had the issue with this one. So this is like a small, it's a dashboard extension also, that when you click on it, will use, and I think that's when the MCP shine also a bit, is using at the same time the image, But if the AI believes that it needs also to get access to the underlying data to give me a better explanation of what is in the dashboard, is going to use. So let's say I have a chart that is a bit difficult to understand, or like visually it doesn't give me all the information, is going to also query the data to give me the actual data, right? So when I click on this button, I'm going to have a voiceover. So someone who is going to tell me everything that I need to know about this dashboard. So even if you are like have a heavy visual deficiency, even if you are blind, you could have someone storytell what's on this dashboard.
Or on your way into work, you could get an audio podcast of your dashboard.
Exactly, yeah, exactly that. But what happened when I click on listen is someone really confidently was telling me a completely different story than what I was telling. And I'm like, well, clearly also he was not inventing. Like it was, you have 4 main KPI, and then I can see a bar chart by segment. And like, I don't have that. I don't know what's happening. And actually I realized that the dashboard extension can only give you through its API the name of the dashboard. So the name of the dashboard was like overview or something. I think, it was called overview. And actually on my server, I had many overview dashboard. So when the dashboard extension got overview dashboard and asked the MCP to query the data and get the image to generate the story of the overview dashboard, then it just selected one of the many overview dashboard in my server.
I've got it. So this is the main limitation of the MCP, because what you're saying is that it's this tool server that gives me access to these underlying tools. But if the underlying tools themselves, or more specifically, if the API endpoints that those tools are speaking to have limitations, which many of them do over long periods of time, then my interaction with the MCP is going to be subject to that. And so because you had 2 or 3 or 5 dashboards named overview on your Tableau server, the API endpoint returned the name of the dashboard because it can't return the workbook ID or the dashboard ID or the LUID. And so because it couldn't get the unique identifier, it just gave me the name. And then the MCP went and got stuff from every dashboard named overview because of the constraint of the API endpoint underneath.
Because everything is happening inside the MCP, you as someone who develops, you don't realize that. And it took me actually some time to understand what was the issue, because I let the AI and the MCP
make its own decisions. And,
exactly.
and unless I put my chat session into verbose mode, where I look at every command line thing of its thinking and what it's going through, and I'm inspecting what it's doing, I'm not going to see that. That's obscured from me.
And that's was a really recurring issue. So I'm showing currently right now another extension that at the end, this one was just like a bit of fun. Like I created like an annotation extension when you can draw stuff on your dashboard, right? So you can make all the nicest annotation you want to explain someone how to read. And I mean like, hey, the MCP can also help me in that for that, right? And I'm using now the MCP to generate annotation. So it's going to look at the different worksheet, also the data, and also the image to generate annotation automatically, right? So here, automatically was able to say, okay, we are looking at the profit ratio by region. When it's blue, it's profitable. When it's orange, it's a loss, right? So that part of just that sentence is because it's a combination of what is on the image. So he was able to detect orange and blue, but also what is currently being displayed in the data, right? So, but that's the same. Since you are passing an image of your dashboard, if at any point the MCP received the wrong image, is going to make really confident annotation of not what you are currently seeing, right? So, yeah.
Well, I mean, to me, one of my main takeaways is that you still need the talented analyst in the seat, right? Because it was confounding at first. Where was this thing coming back with the conclusion that there's a bar chart in my overview dashboard? Because the overview dashboard that I'm talking about doesn't have a bar chart in it, and that turns out to have been a limitation of the API behind the scenes. And so it's this combination of both having his existing code base and his intimate knowledge of what good looks like, on top of the tech stack and the workflow, and then the ability to not just accept what a vibe coded output is coming back with as truth, but to really probe it and investigate it from a skeptical manner because I know what the answers and what the output should be.
So, and I will add another really important component for me. Understand what also Tableau users want. So not only on the technical skills, but for example, in the check extension, adding a spell check in Tableau, it was kind of a if you have been long enough in the Tableau, you know it's a bit of a running joke of like, when are they going to just allow me to spell check my thing in Tableau or in Tableau, right, in general. So is a lot of the tools that we have also built are annotation is another one, right? For a really long time, annotation is you try to make a floating worksheet on top of your dashboard, and then you use the kind of marks annotation to create some kind, and you have like the show hide button. So you have kind of clunky way, hacky way of doing it. But I think like nothing kind of replace also having experience in the tool to know what needs to be built. Right. And I think
it's another reason why the analyst is irreplaceable, not only for the technical things, but for knowing what the audience actually wants to consume.
Yeah.
In terms of synthesis, one of my main takeaways is that AI is exposing really these underlying gaps in the architecture that have been there for a long time, like you mentioned with the image problems that you were having and with the problems with the API endpoints. What would you say, Tristan, are the main places where we've looked at the benefits of the MCP, but where this entire space kind of could use some attention from Tableau?
The MCP is surfacing those issues, and since Tableau puts a lot of its money in the development of those AI tools and the MCP, I think it's at the same time like the main issue on the nearest future, but also kind of what might hopefully allow us to have much better API in the future. Because like I say, like the MCP will only be as good as the best API available, right? So if your API cannot do something, your MCP also will not be able to do it.
So the saying goes, sunshine is the great disinfectant. And so MCP is the sunshine, like pouring light on all of these API endpoints and the workflows that people want to use. And as the result of that light being shown, we can expect that those API endpoints will improve.
You're a builder that is so comfortable with Tableau and also comfortable with JavaScript and other coding tools. My risky question to you now is, have you ever taken your setup off-road and maybe built analytics directly in code as a vibe coder? What is your opinion about vibe coding as a path forward for analysts?
It's something we have in mind, definitely. So I think it's also a risk for Tableau, right? Because the more you do, like for example, VDS, so vSQL data service, right? So you can query any data source, published data source outside of Tableau, is great, but also I can now kind of have maybe one user on my server that will query the data and just surface everything else in another place, right? Or in another tool, or make my own abstraction of. And the idea even was that in the future, you could use all of the MCP of the different tools that you have, right? And just combine it into one main central intelligent place where you'll be like, my sales exist in many different places. Maybe they mean different things. Maybe today, depending on what is on my agenda, and I'm really sharing some of the really early thoughts of like something that I want to build in the future, right? So maybe depending on what is on your agenda, maybe what is on the last emails that you have in your inbox, and the data that you have in Tableau, and maybe a few other Snowflake and a few other tools, maybe you are just arriving to a place that the insights are going to be already pre-aggregated for you or surfaced to you, because that's what right now you need to know.
Yep. And so the Tableau server itself is actually you anticipate it can see increasing distance from the end user. And maybe the end user is just, some of the data is coming from Tableau in some ways, but they're not interacting with it. They've got this other kind of layer in between that's more proactively serving them with data from different places.
Yes, and that's when you also wonder then what is at the end the point of
The
Tableau
true
itself, right?
value proposition of Tableau. What is that?
Because you still, like in that scenario, you still use what has been built and the intelligence in the published data source, right? So that what kind of, they say, the semantic model, right? What is in your data source. But why would you need it in Tableau in the long run, right? So yeah, that's kind of the interesting future. I don't know. I just like to build things. So every month we have a new idea of something we would like to build. So yeah, let's see where this goes. But it's interesting time for sure. Yeah.
So like it doesn't take that much of a engineering effort to spin up a tool server and maybe wrap some APIs in a way that they're exposed to an agent, right? But it does take very good architects and engineers to know how to abstract something so that other junior engineers and now coding agents can get value from that. And it's better than other designs. That abstraction battle is what we're at now.
Yes, I guess so, yes. Mm-hmm.
Like what makes the difference between me wanting to use a library, an open source library online, is because it's better and it's way easier than any of the other options out there. Somebody that is a very good engineer, architect is able to do that, but not every organization.
Yeah. And I guess that's when we will see who wins, right, at the end of the day. Yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation. I hope and everything that I build is available on visual.ladataviz.com. You can also find easily more demo online. Like I have a small YouTube video. Don't hesitate to reach out also if you have a further question about what I build. I think it was really interesting also for me to show you some of the good stuff that are available with the MCP. It's one, I think mostly is one brick that was important to exist at that point in time in order to shine more light, as you said, in what Tableau needs to fix. And I'm really happy about Tableau is pushing more and more content around data dev. So around making sure people are building more stuff on the Tableau platform. In the last TC, there was a lot of data dev sessions. And I think that's really shown that Tableau is aware of that and Tableau wants to make that better. And I think the MCP will contribute to that. Yeah.
Super. Well, it's been great having you on, Tristan. I hope we can do it again. First collaboration between our YouTube channels. I agree. It looks like this MCP is a step in a journey and we don't know how it's going to unfold. So we'll just keep surfing the wave and see what happens next.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.